Ethan was just an ordinary college student, living a simple life. He wasn't anyone special. He didn't have any heroic dreams or grand ambitions. His days were filled with history books, research papers, and the occasional video game session. He lived in a small dorm room in a quiet college town, far away from any adventures or excitement. To him, life was calm and predictable, and that was just how he liked it. He had no interest in fantasy stories or heroic sagas. To Ethan, those were just fantasies meant to entertain people. He preferred to stay grounded in reality. But little did he know, reality was about to shift in ways he couldn't even imagine. It all started one evening when Ethan was sitting at his desk, reviewing notes for his history class. His room was dimly lit by the desk lamp, and the soft hum of his computer filled the silence. Just as he was about to take a break and check his email, something caught his eye. A strange notification on his screen. The subject of the email read, "You are needed." At first, Ethan assumed it was spam. He had seen many similar subject lines before, trying to sell him something or trick him into clicking on suspicious links. He almost ignored it, but there was something about this one that felt different. It wasn't like the usual advertisements or random promotions. The words seemed oddly direct, as if they were speaking to him personally. "You are needed." Ethan frowned and clicked on the email, curiosity nudging him to see what it was about. The sender was listed as the Oracle, and Ethan had never heard of anyone by that name. But something about it felt important. The email opened, and the message inside was just as strange as the subject line. "The Princess of Thaloria is in danger. The prophecy has foretold the arrival of the one who will save her. You, Ethan, are the hero who must answer the call. Your world and hers are connected. Your journey begins now. Follow the instructions carefully. You are our last hope." Ethan blinked, reading the message again. Was this some sort of joke? A prank? He scrolled through the email, but there was no sign of who sent it or how they knew his name. He rubbed his eyes and read the message again. "The Princess of Thaloria. A prophecy. Hero." None of this made sense. He leaned back in his chair and laughed. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself. "Somebody's clearly messing with me." Ethan thought about deleting the email and moving on with his evening, but something about it lingered in his mind. A strange pull, a feeling in his gut that he couldn't explain. He felt like he should at least check out the link attached to the email. Maybe it was part of some elaborate online game or a marketing stunt. With a sigh, he clicked the link. A sudden, blinding flash of light filled his room. The light was so bright, so intense, that Ethan gasped and instinctively shielded his eyes. But before he could react further, his surroundings began to blur and twist. For a moment, everything went black. Then, as the light faded away, Ethan opened his eyes to find himself standing in the middle of a dense, unfamiliar forest. The tall trees towered above him, their leaves rustling gently in the wind. The air smelled fresh and earthy, and he could hear the chirping of birds in the distance. Ethan's heart raced as he looked around in confusion. He wasn't in his dorm room anymore. He wasn't even on Earth. Panic set in as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. How had he gone from sitting at his desk in his college dorm to standing in the middle of a strange forest? He reached for his phone, but it was gone. There was no sign of it anywhere. No Wi-Fi, no signal, nothing that would connect him to the world he knew. What the heck is going on? Ethan muttered to himself. His pulse quickened as his mind raced with questions. Had he just been teleported to another world? Was this real? Or was he dreaming? Before he could figure it out, a voice broke the silence. "Are you the one they sent?" Ethan spun around, startled, and saw a man standing a few feet away. He was dressed in armor, carrying a bow and a quiver of arrows. His eyes were serious, and his posture was that of someone who had seen countless battles. The man's gaze seemed to pierce right through him, and there was a mix of curiosity and urgency in his expression. Who are you?" Ethan stammered, his mind still racing. "I am Eric, "A knight from the kingdom of Thaloria," the man replied. "And you, Ethan, are the hero foretold in the prophecy. We've been waiting for you." Ethan's brain was in overdrive. Thaloria, a prophecy, hero. He shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan said, his voice shaky. "I'm just a student. I don't know anything about a prophecy or being a hero. I think you've got the wrong person." Eric didn't seem surprised. He merely gave Ethan a knowing look. "The prophecy speaks of one who will come from another world to save the princess. You are that person." Ethan's head spun. This couldn't be real. He was just an average college student who had somehow stumbled into a wild, fantasy-like situation. The idea of being some sort of hero felt absurd. He had never picked up a sword, never been in a fight, and definitely wasn't the type to go on some grand adventure. "This is insane," Ethan muttered, shaking his head. "I don't even know where I am." Eric stepped closer, his expression serious. "You are in Thaloria, a land of great beauty and great danger. The princess is trapped in the dark tower of the cursed castle, and only you can save her. You've been chosen, Ethan." Ethan blinked, trying to understand what was happening. "Wait, you're telling me I'm supposed to rescue a princess? Like some kind of fairy tale?" "Yes," Eric said with conviction. "But this is no fairy tale. This is real. The princess is in grave danger. The evil that holds her captive grows stronger with each passing day. Only the one who answers the prophecy can break the curse." Ethan didn't know what to say. It all sounded like something straight out of a fantasy novel, but there was no denying the reality of his situation. He was standing in a strange forest, talking to a man in armor, and he had no idea how he had gotten here or what was happening. "This is crazy," Ethan said, rubbing his forehead. "But if what you're saying is true, then what do I do now?" Eric held out a sword. "Take this. It is the weapon of the hero. You must come with me to the castle. Time is running out." Ethan stared at the sword in Eric's hand. It looked real, too real. He hesitated, his mind still racing with questions. He didn't know how to wield a sword, let alone fight a curse or defeat an evil sorcerer, but something deep inside him, something he couldn't explain, told him that this was a chance he couldn't ignore. Reluctantly, he took the sword from Eric. It felt heavier than he expected, but there was a strange sense of power that surged through him the moment his fingers gripped the hilt. It was as if the sword was meant for him. "I don't know what's going on," Ethan said, looking at Eric. "But I guess I don't have much of a choice, do I?" Eric nodded solemnly. "The prophecy cannot be ignored, Ethan. The fate of Thaloria, and of your world, rests in your hands." With that, the two of them began their journey, walking deeper into the forest, toward the castle, toward an uncertain future. Ethan walked alongside Eric, his mind spinning with questions. Every few steps, he glanced at the sword in his hand, unsure of what to do with it, or even how to hold it properly. He had never picked up a sword before in his life. He was more of a gamer than a fighter. Yet, somehow, this weight in his hand felt important, as though it was a part of him. The forest around them was dense, with trees towering above, their trunks thick and dark. The air smelled fresh, filled with the earthy scent of the woods. Birds chirped in the distance, and the occasional rustling of leaves underfoot reminded Ethan that this was no ordinary place. This was another world, a world that felt both strange and somehow familiar. A sense of unease settled over him as they moved deeper into the forest. "Where exactly are we going?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He didn't want to sound too anxious, but the confusion was starting to get to him. This was no ordinary adventure. This was real. He could feel it in his bones. Eric glanced at him, his face serious but not unkind. "We are heading toward the kingdom of Thaloria. It's not far from here. The castle where the princess is trapped lies in the heart of the kingdom, but we must move quickly. Time is not on our side." Ethan nodded, though he couldn't quite shake the feeling that he was in over his head. The kingdom of Thaloria. He had never heard of it before. How could he, when this was a world entirely different from his own? The trees began to thin out as they continued their journey, and soon the landscape started to change. The dense forest gave way to rolling hills, and the air felt fresher. The ground beneath Ethan's feet was softer now, and he could see wildflowers blooming in patches along the path. It was beautiful in an untouched, natural way. "Is this what Thaloria looks like?" Ethan asked, looking around at the peaceful landscape. Eric nodded, his expression softening. "Yes, but this is only the outskirts of the kingdom. Thaloria is a land of great beauty, but also of danger. There are creatures and people who are not as kind as the land itself. We must be cautious." Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Despite the strange circumstances that had brought him here, the world around him was breathtaking. The golden light of the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. The sounds of the forest were soothing, and the occasional breeze ruffled his hair. "Are there really beasts out here? Monsters or evil things?" Ethan asked, his curiosity starting to overtake his fear. Eric's expression darkened. "Yes, the cursed castle is guarded by beasts, creatures twisted by dark magic, and the land around the castle is no safer. Many who venture too close to the castle never return." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "That sounds terrifying." "It is," Eric said simply. "But it is not the beasts we must worry about the most." Ethan turned to face him, confused. "What do you mean? Aren't the beasts the biggest threat?" Eric gave him a grave look. "The greatest threat in Thaloria is the dark sorcery that controls the land. The curse that traps the princess is only a part of it. There are forces at work here, forces far older and more powerful than anything you've likely encountered. You must be prepared, Ethan. You are not just a hero in a story. You are the key to everything." A heavy silence fell between them. Ethan wasn't sure what to say. He had no idea what Eric meant by the key to everything, but the gravity in his voice made it clear that things were about to get much more complicated. The walk continued, and the landscape around them shifted once more. As they crested a hill, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Below them stretched a vast, sparkling river that had wound its way through the valley. The river glistened in the sunlight, and on the other side of it, Ethan could see the faint outline of a city, tall stone buildings, wide roads, and towers that seemed to stretch toward the sky. It was like something out of a fairy tale, but it was real. "That's Thaloria?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Yes," Eric answered, "and it is a kingdom on the brink of disaster." As they descended toward the river, Ethan couldn't help but feel a strange connection to this place. It was so different from his world, yet there was something about it that felt right. He wasn't sure if it was the beauty of the land or the adventure that awaited him, but he had an odd sense of belonging, as if this journey was meant to be his. Soon, they arrived at the riverbank. The water flowed swiftly, its currents sparkling as they caught the light. There was no bridge in sight, but Eric seemed unfazed. "We'll have to cross here," he said. Ethan stared at the river, unsure of how they would manage it. The water was fast, and the current looked strong. But before he could ask, Eric stepped forward and raised his hand. He muttered something under his breath, and Ethan watched in awe as the water seemed to part before them. Slowly, a path of stones appeared, rising from the river, forming a bridge across the water. Ethan's mouth dropped open. "What? How did you do that?" Eric smiled faintly. "That is the magic of Thaloria. Magic is a part of this world, something you'll need to learn if you are to survive." "Magic?" Ethan repeated, still in disbelief. "So this world has magic? Like real magic?" "Yes," Eric said, "and you will need to understand it if you are to defeat the forces that threaten this kingdom, and your own." Ethan followed Eric across the stone path, still in awe of what he had just witnessed. They reached the other side of the river, and as they continued along the road toward the kingdom, Ethan's mind was racing. Magic, curses, prophecy. Everything seemed too fantastical to be true. Yet he couldn't deny the reality of it. He was here, in a land where magic existed, and somehow he was supposed to save a princess. The closer they got to the city, the more Ethan could feel the weight of his role as the hero. There were people in the fields, working and tending to their crops, but they looked wary, eyes darting nervously to the horizon, as if expecting something terrible to happen at any moment. The air felt thick with tension, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He looked at Eric, who seemed calm but focused. "Why do the people look so scared?" Ethan asked quietly. Eric's expression darkened. "The kingdom has been under the shadow of the curse for many years. The princess's captivity has caused unrest. There are whispers of a great evil rising, one that threatens to destroy everything. The people are afraid, but they also don't know who they can trust anymore." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had heard about corrupt rulers and evil sorcerers in history books, but this felt different. The people here weren't just stories. They were real, and they were suffering. They entered the city, and Ethan was struck by its size and beauty. The buildings were tall, made of stone and wood, with intricate carvings decorating the walls. Marketplaces bustled with vendors selling food, fabrics, and crafts, while children ran and played in the streets. Yet beneath the surface of this bustling city, Ethan could sense the tension. People moved quickly, as though they were afraid of being caught in something they couldn't escape. Eric led him through the city's streets, avoiding the main squares. They seemed to be headed for a quieter part of town, where the buildings were older and more worn. It was here that Ethan noticed the change in the atmosphere. The streets were emptier, the air heavier. As they walked, Eric stopped and turned to Ethan. "We must be careful here," he said, his voice low. "There are those who do not want the prophecy to come true. Some believe the curse should remain, that the princess should stay locked away." Ethan's mind raced. Why would anyone want that? Eric's eyes were cold. Power. Control. Some believe that if the princess is freed, it will mean the end of the dark forces that have ruled over this kingdom, and they will stop at nothing to keep their hold. Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of his mission settling heavily on his shoulders. He had come here thinking he was just an ordinary student, thrown into an extraordinary situation. But now he could see that the stakes were much higher than he had ever imagined. The fate of this kingdom, maybe even his own world, rested on his shoulders. As Ethan followed Eric through the winding streets of Thaloria, the sense of dread continued to grow. The city around him seemed to have a life of its own. It was beautiful, yes, but there was a heavy silence hanging in the air, a sense of something bad looming just beyond the horizon. People moved quickly, as if afraid to be caught out in the open, and the more Ethan looked at their faces, the more he saw fear in their eyes. He couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of wonder and unease. A part of him was still reeling from the shock of being here, but another part was beginning to feel the weight of his mission. Eric had told him the princess was in grave danger, but Ethan couldn't yet imagine the true extent of that danger. "So, where exactly are we going?" Ethan asked, trying to sound casual, though his curiosity was clearly getting the better of him. "You've mentioned the princess, but I still don't understand what happened to her or why she's trapped." Eric glanced at him as they walked, his face solemn. "We are headed to the castle," he said. "The princess's plight is more dangerous than you can imagine. It all began many years ago." Ethan frowned. "What happened? How did she end up trapped?" Eric hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a quiet voice. "Long ago, the kingdom of Thaloria was ruled by a just and fair king. The people loved him, and the kingdom prospered. The king had a daughter, a beautiful and kind princess named Ilara. She was beloved by all who knew her, and her heart was pure." "Sounds like a fairy tale," Ethan said, half smiling, though his curiosity was piqued. "It was, Eric replied. Until one day, the darkness came. Ethan slowed his pace as they walked, intrigued. Darkness? You mean like an army or something? Eric shook his head. No, it was much worse than that. A sorcerer known as Malakar arrived in Thaloria. He was powerful, beyond anything we had ever seen. He sought to control the kingdom, and in his twisted ambition, he placed a curse upon Princess Ilara. The curse locked her away in a dark tower, and with it, he bound her to a fate that cannot be broken by ordinary means. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. A curse? So the princess is trapped in this tower, and nobody can free her. Not just any tower, Eric continued. The cursed tower lies at the center of the kingdom, in a fortress protected by dark magic. No one has been able to reach it in years. The curse Malakar placed upon her also affects the entire kingdom. Crops wither, animals grow sick, and the land itself is dying. Ethan swallowed hard, his stomach twisting. So if the princess is freed, the curse will be broken. That's what we believe, Eric said. But there's more to it than that. The sorcerer's magic is so strong that even our best warriors have been unable to defeat him. Only the one chosen by the prophecy can undo his spell. Ethan could feel the weight of Eric's words settle on him like a heavy stone. So, you really think I'm the one who can break this curse? He asked, half laughing nervously. I'm just a college student from Earth. I don't know anything about magic or curses or sorcerers. Eric's gaze softened, but there was still a serious edge to it. You may not know everything yet, but the prophecy has chosen you, Ethan. You carry the power to defeat Malakar and break the curse. The path ahead will not be easy, but you must trust in yourself. Ethan wasn't sure he could trust in himself just yet, but as they continued their journey toward the castle, the determination in Eric's voice began to make him feel something. Something he hadn't felt since he'd arrived in Thaloria. Hope. The castle loomed ahead, its dark silhouette cutting into the bright sky. It was built on a hill, surrounded by a moat that looked too wide to cross. High stone walls rose up, their tops sharp like the teeth of a great beast. Ethan could see torches burning in the windows, casting an eerie glow. The castle looked ancient, its stones weathered and covered with moss. It was both beautiful and terrifying. As they neared the castle, Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He had seen castles in books and movies, but this one felt different. There was something oppressive about it, something evil lurking within its walls. Eric led him to a hidden entrance, a narrow door tucked away in the shadow of the castle's massive outer walls. The door was old and creaked loudly when Eric pushed it open. Inside, the air was cold and damp, and the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. Ethan could barely see anything as they made their way through the narrow corridors. The castle felt abandoned, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Finally, they reached a small, stone-walled chamber deep within the castle. At the center of the room stood an ancient stone pedestal, and on it, glowing with a faint, eerie light, was a crystal orb. Eric stopped in front of it and turned to Ethan. This orb contains the key to the princess's curse, Eric explained. It was given to us by the ancient protectors of the kingdom. Only the one chosen by the prophecy can use it to break the curse. Ethan's brow furrowed. So I'm supposed to use that to free her? Yes, Eric said. But first, you must understand that breaking this curse will not be easy. Malakar's magic is deeply embedded in the land, and only someone with a pure heart can defeat him. You must be ready for what lies ahead. Ethan nodded, but his mind was racing. How could he possibly defeat a sorcerer like Malakar? He had no powers, no special skills, nothing that made him stand out. Yet, as Eric handed him the glowing orb, Ethan could feel a strange warmth seep into his palm. It was almost as if the orb was alive, pulsing with energy. This orb will guide you, Eric said, but remember, you are not alone. The people of Thaloria are counting on you, and so is the princess. Ethan held the orb tightly in his hand, its glow brighter now, and for the first time since arriving in this strange world, He felt something stir within him. It was a sense of purpose, a fire igniting deep inside his chest. He didn't know how he was going to do it, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't turn back now. They made their way up a winding staircase to the top of the tower, the stone walls damp and covered with vines. The higher they went, the colder it became. Ethan could feel the magic in the air, thick and oppressive. At the top of the tower, they found a large iron door, which creaked open when Eric pushed it. Inside, a cold wind howled through the room, and there, in the center of it all, sat Princess Ilara. She was beautiful, her long golden hair flowing around her like a halo, and her face was peaceful despite the clear signs of the curse. She was trapped in a crystal cocoon, a magical prison that kept her bound to the tower. Her eyes were closed, but there was something about her expression that made Ethan feel that she was waiting for him to break the curse. Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Princess Ilara," he whispered as though she might hear him, but there was no response. Eric spoke softly from behind him. "The curse is strong. You must use the orb to break it. Focus your energy and believe in yourself. You are the one who can set her free." Ethan took a deep breath and raised the orb high above his head. He closed his eyes, trying to center his thoughts. The weight of the prophecy, the burden of the kingdom, and the fate of the princess all rested on him now. He didn't know how to do this, but he had to try. The orb in his hand began to glow brighter and brighter, its light filling the entire room. He could feel its power coursing through him, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. Slowly, the crystal cocoon around Princess Ilara began to crack, the magic breaking apart piece by piece. For a long moment, everything was still. Then, with a loud shattering noise, the crystal cocoon collapsed, and Princess Ilara fell into Ethan's arms. She was free. The moment Ethan stepped outside the hidden entrance of the castle, he felt as if the world around him had shifted. The air seemed heavier, charged with an unspoken tension, and he could feel the ground beneath his feet pulsing with energy. The princess was free, but the real challenge was only just beginning. Beside him, Eric was as calm as ever, his face set in a determined expression. His cloak billowed in the wind as they made their way down the steep path that led away from the castle, towards the heart of Thaloria. Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the journey ahead. The princess might have been freed from the crystal cocoon, but there were still many dangers waiting for them. "We have to move quickly," Eric said, glancing over his shoulder at the castle that loomed like a dark sentinel behind them. "Malachar will know soon enough that the princess is no longer trapped. We cannot allow him to catch up to us." Ethan nodded, clutching the orb tightly in his hand. It was still glowing, a soft blue light that seemed to pulse with energy. "What exactly is Malachar? I mean, I know he's a sorcerer, but what makes him so powerful?" Eric's eyes darkened as he spoke. Malachar was once a part of the royal court, but he was consumed by his desire for power. He turned to dark magic, seeking immortality and control over the entire kingdom. He grew stronger with every spell he cast, until he was no longer human. Now he is something more. His power is tied to the land itself, and as long as he remains in control, Thaloria will continue to suffer. Ethan felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine. "So we have to stop him before he destroys everything." "Yes," Eric said simply, "but it is not just the land we need to save. The princess is crucial to ending his reign. She carries the bloodline of the royal family, the only bloodline that can break Malachar's magic. Without her, the kingdom is doomed." Ethan thought about this for a moment. He had no idea how he had ended up in this world, let alone why he had been chosen to be the one to save it. But now, as he looked at Princess Ilara, her eyes closed, her pale face soft in sleep, he knew there was no turning back. He had to do whatever it took to stop Malachar. For her, for the kingdom, for all of Thaloria. As they journeyed further down the winding path, the landscape around them began to change. The rolling hills, once filled with green grass and colorful flowers, gave way to barren fields. The trees that had lined their path were now twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. A thick fog began to rise from the ground, blanketing everything in a cold, ghostly mist. "This doesn't feel right," Ethan muttered, his heart racing. "It's like the land itself is dying." Eric glanced around, his expression grim. "This is the work of Malachar. His dark magic seeps into the earth, draining the life from everything it touches. It's only a matter of time before the entire kingdom is corrupted." They continued on in silence, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick fog. Every now and then, Ethan thought he heard something moving in the mist, strange whispers and soft rustlings that made his skin crawl. He wasn't sure if it was his imagination, but the feeling of being watched never left him. After what seemed like hours, they reached the edge of a dark forest. The trees here were even larger than the ones they had passed before, their trunks twisted and covered in thick vines. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, and the only sound was the crunch of their feet on the dry leaves beneath them. "We need to cross this forest to reach the castle," Eric said, his voice low. "But we must be careful. The creatures that lurk here are not like any we've faced before." Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. What kind of creatures? Eric's face darkened. Beasts twisted by Malachar's magic. They were once normal animals, but his dark sorcery has warped them into something else. Some are massive, with claws that can tear through stone. Others are more subtle, silent, but deadly. Ethan's hand instinctively went to the sword at his side. He had never held a real sword before, but somehow it felt like an extension of himself. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face these creatures, but he had no choice. He had to help save this world. They entered the forest, and as soon as they did, the temperature seemed to drop. The trees blocked out much of the sunlight, leaving them in a constant state of twilight. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the ground beneath their feet was soft, almost like walking on wet sponge. Ethan's eyes scanned the shadows, his senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made him jump. He wasn't sure how long they had been walking when they heard the first noise, a low guttural growl that echoed through the trees. Eric stopped dead in his tracks, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "Stay close," he whispered, "and don't make a sound." Ethan's heart thudded in his chest as he clutched the sword tightly. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he could feel the tension in the air. Then, from the darkness of the forest, two glowing eyes appeared, followed by a hulking figure emerging from the mist. It was a massive wolf-like creature, its fur black as midnight, with jagged claws and sharp fangs. Its eyes burned with a fiery red glow. Before Ethan could react, the creature lunged at them with terrifying speed, its jaws snapping shut just inches from his face. Eric stepped in front of him, sword raised, and with one swift motion, he struck the creature down. The beast let out a terrible howl before collapsing to the ground in a heap. Ethan stood frozen, his breath coming in ragged gasps. What was that?" "A shadow beast," Eric replied, his voice calm despite the danger. "One of the many creatures Malachar has twisted with his magic. They are not easy to kill." Ethan's mind raced. The world he had found himself in was much darker and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. But in that moment, as he looked at Eric's steady hand on his sword, something clicked inside him. He was a part of this now. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He had a role to play, and he needed to step up. They continued deeper into the forest, the sounds of creatures moving in the shadows growing louder. Every step felt like a risk, but Eric led the way, confident and resolute. Ethan followed, doing his best to stay alert and not let the fear overwhelm him. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to stretch on forever. Every time they thought they were nearing the edge, the path twisted in unexpected directions. The trees grew thicker, the air heavier. Ethan began to lose track of time, his mind too focused on survival to think about anything else. Finally, As the moon began to rise in the sky, they'd reached the edge of the forest. Beyond it, they could see the castle, the dark fortress that was the heart of all the evil in Thaloria. The castle was enormous, its towers rising high into the night sky, like jagged teeth ready to devour everything in their path. The air around it felt suffocating, and Ethan could almost taste the dark magic that clung to its walls. "This is it," Eric said, his voice grim. "The final stretch. Once we enter the castle, we will be facing Malachar himself. You must be ready for anything." Ethan swallowed hard. The journey had been long, and the dangers were far from over. But as he looked at the castle in the distance, he felt a new sense of resolve stir inside him. He had come this far, and now there was no turning back. He was ready to face whatever Malachar had in store, and he would do whatever it took to save the princess, and to save Thaloria. Ethan's heart raced as he stood before the towering gates of the castle. The dark fortress loomed in front of him like a giant, menacing shadow. The night air felt thick with magic, and he could almost taste the evil that hung around the castle walls. Eric stood beside him, his eyes narrowed, watching for any sign of movement. "The time has come," Eric said, his voice steady but tense. "Once we cross these gates, there will be no turning back." Ethan nodded, his stomach a twisted knot of nerves. They had fought through dark forests and escaped the deadly creatures Malachar had sent after them. But none of that had prepared him for what was waiting inside the castle. Malachar's power was almost legendary, and Ethan had no idea how he, a simple college student from Earth, was supposed to defeat him. But what choice did he have? Eric placed a hand on his shoulder, his expression serious. "Remember, Ethan, the prophecy speaks of a hero with a heart pure enough to break the curse. That's why you're here. It's not just about defeating Malachar. It's about restoring the balance, freeing Princess Ilara, and saving Thaloria. You can do this." The words were comforting, but the doubt inside Ethan's mind still lingered. He had never imagined he would be in a situation like this. A week ago, he had been at school, studying for exams. Now he was standing at the gates of a magical fortress, with the fate of an entire kingdom resting on his shoulders. "Right," Ethan said, swallowing his nerves. "Let's do this." With a deep breath, they stepped forward. The gates creaked open with an eerie groan, as if the castle itself was alive, aware of their arrival. As they walked through the dark courtyard, the castle seemed to pulse with energy, like an ancient beast stirring from a long slumber. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness, and the air felt heavy, oppressive. Ethan glanced over at Princess Ilara, who had been resting in Eric's arms during their journey. She looked peaceful, her face still soft and serene, though a shadow seemed to hang over her. Despite her beauty, Ethan couldn't ignore the sadness that clouded her features, as if she was burdened by something no one else could see. Eric seemed to sense Ethan's curiosity. "There's more to Ilara's story than you know," he said, his voice soft. "The curse placed on her is not as simple as it seems. It's connected to her bloodline, but it's also tied to a secret she has kept hidden for many years." Ethan stopped walking. "A secret?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "What kind of secret?" Eric hesitated before speaking. "You'll learn more when the time is right. But know this, Princess Ilara's fate is intertwined with Malachar's power. The curse isn't just a spell, it's a manifestation of something far darker." The words sent a chill through Ethan's spine. What could be darker than a curse that had already destroyed so much of Thaloria? He couldn't even begin to imagine the truth behind Eric's words, but he knew one thing for sure. The princess was more important than anyone realized, and freeing her was the key to stopping Malachar. They'd moved deeper into the castle, passing through dark corridors that twisted and turned like a labyrinth. The walls were covered in shadows, and the air grew colder with every step they took. It felt as if the very castle itself was resisting their presence, trying to keep them out. But they pushed forward, knowing there was no turning back now. Finally, They'd reached a large chamber at the heart of the castle. The room was vast, its high ceiling supported by tall, imposing columns. The floor was made of dark stone, and in the center of the room stood an altar bathed in an unnatural red glow. The air in the room was thick with dark magic, and Ethan could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. At the altar stood a figure, a tall man cloaked in black, his face hidden beneath a hood. His presence was suffocating, and Ethan could feel the power radiating from him like heat from a fire. Malachar, the sorcerer who had brought the kingdom to its knees. The moment Malachar spoke, his voice was like a low, rumbling thunder. "So, you've come to challenge me, boy," he said, his words dripping with malice. "You think you can defeat me. You think you can break my curse." Ethan stepped forward, trying to steady his trembling hands. "I'm here to free the princess and put an end to your reign of terror." Malachar laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. "Free her? You think you can save her? Foolish child. You don't understand. The princess is mine, and she always will be." Eric drew his sword, stepping in front of Ethan. "You've corrupted her for too long, Malachar. Her bloodline doesn't belong to you. It belongs to Thaloria. It's time to end this." Malachar's eyes glowed a fiery red as he raised his hand, summoning dark energy. The room trembled as if the castle itself were alive, its walls pulsing with magic. Ethan could feel the heat of Malachar's power radiating toward him, and for a moment he felt a deep fear settle in his chest. But then something unexpected happened. Princess Ilara stirred in Eric's arms, her eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze immediately locked with Malachar's, and for a moment the entire room seemed to freeze. Ethan could see a faint glow in her eyes, something ancient, something powerful. The magic in the room shifted, becoming less oppressive and more balanced. "Ilara," Ethan whispered, his heart racing. What was happening? The princess's voice was soft, but it carried an authority that made the air tremble. "You think you control me, Malachar. You think my blood is yours to command." She slowly stood, her presence radiating power. "You are mistaken." Malachar's expression twisted into one of shock. You've hidden your true power from me," he hissed. "No matter. You are mine. I've already bound you with my magic." Ilara smiled, though there was sadness in her eyes. "Your magic cannot bind me forever. It can only control me for as long as I let it." Ethan's eyes widened in realization. "The princess," he began, but he couldn't find the words to explain what he was feeling. Something had changed. Ilara was not just a victim of the curse. She was more than that. She had hidden a secret, something that even Malachar had not understood. Ilara stepped forward, her voice stronger now. "You may have thought you could twist my bloodline, Malachar, but you have underestimated me. The power that you tried to control was never yours to take." With a swift motion, Ilara raised her hand, and a beam of radiant light shot from her palm, striking Malachar with such force that it knocked him back against the walls of the chamber. The dark energy that had surrounded the room began to dissipate, replaced by a brilliant glow. Malachar groaned in agony, his hands trying to shield himself from the light. "No, this cannot be. You are mine." But Ilara's voice was calm, unyielding. "I was never yours, Malachar. I've always been my own." The light grew brighter, surrounding Malachar like a cage. The sorcerer's screams echoed through the room as his power began to break apart. The walls of the castle seemed to shake as his magic unraveled. The air itself was charged with energy as the curse began to lift. Ethan stood frozen, watching in awe as Ilara's true power was unleashed. He had always known she was important, but now he understood. The princess was the key to stopping Malachar, not because of the bloodline that ran through her, but because of the strength of her spirit. The curse had never truly controlled her. It had only been a veil, hiding her true potential. With one final burst of energy, Ilara's light engulfed the room, and Malachar's cries were silenced. The castle trembled. And then, suddenly, Everything went still. The curse was broken. The room was silent, the eerie glow of the light slowly fading into nothingness. The powerful energy that had filled the air moments before now dissipated, leaving behind a strange calm. The walls of the castle, once pulsing with dark magic, now seemed still, almost lifeless. Ethan stood in stunned silence, staring at Princess Ilara. She had done it. She had freed herself from Malakar's curse. But the way she stood now, with her eyes glowing faintly in the aftermath of the battle, there was something more about her. Something different. Beside him, Eric took a cautious step forward, his sword still in his hand, ready for anything. But even he seemed unsure of what to say, his eyes fixed on the princess with a mixture of awe and disbelief. They had come here to save her, to break the curse that had bound her for so long. But what they had uncovered was something neither of them had expected. "Ilara," Eric said, his voice almost a whisper. "Is it truly over? Has Malakar been defeated?" The princess turned to face them, her expression calm, but there was a flicker of something darker in her eyes, something that sent a chill through Ethan's spine. Her once soft features now carried the weight of ancient power, and her gaze, though filled with determination, was colder than he had ever seen it. "I am free, yes," she said, her voice steady but distant. "But it is not over." Ethan's heart sank. "What do you mean?" he asked, taking a step toward her. "Malakar is gone. The curse is broken. The kingdom is free." Ilara's eyes met his, and for the first time, Ethan saw a glimmer of something regretful. "What you do not understand, Ethan," she said, her voice low, "is that Malakar was not the true enemy." The words hit Ethan like a slap in the face. He blinked in confusion, his mind struggling to make sense of what she was saying. "Not the true enemy, but he's the one who cursed you. He's the one who destroyed Thaloria." Ilara shook her head slowly, her expression unreadable. "He was a pawn, a tool. Malakar was merely the one who carried out the curse, but the true force behind it, the one who twisted everything, is much older, much more dangerous." Eric's grip on his sword tightened, his eyes narrowing as he listened to her words. "Who are you talking about?" he demanded. "What are you trying to say?" The princess turned away from them, her gaze drifting toward the far end of the room, where shadows danced on the walls like whispers. "It was always the bloodline," she said softly. "The royal bloodline. My bloodline." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "Your bloodline," he repeated. "But I don't understand. I thought your bloodline was supposed to be the key to stopping Malakar, to breaking the curse." "It is," Ilara said, her voice growing softer. "But there is more to the story, more than you know. The curse was only the beginning. It was a test, a way to prepare me for what was to come." Ethan's mind raced. "What do you mean? A test for what?" For a long moment, Ilara remained silent, her back to them as she gazed into the distance. Then, with a heavy sigh, she finally spoke, her words trembling with emotion. "I was born to bring balance to Thaloria," she said, turning to face them once again. "Not just to free it from Malakar's magic, but to free it from something much older, something that has been controlling the kingdom for centuries." Eric took a step forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you saying? You've been trying to stop Malakar, but now you're telling us it's not about him." Ilara's eyes darkened as she spoke. The royal family's bloodline was never meant to rule over Thaloria. It was meant to maintain a delicate balance, one that has been disrupted for generations. Malakar was a symptom of a much greater force, a force that has been manipulating our kingdom from the shadows. Ethan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. What force? Who could have that kind of power? Ilara's gaze shifted to the ceiling, as if searching for the right words. "It is the magic of the gods," she whispered. "The power that originally created Thaloria." At her words, the room seemed to grow colder. The flickering shadows on the walls stretched and shifted, as if they were alive, responding to her confession. Eric's face twisted with disbelief. The gods. Are you saying that the gods themselves have been controlling everything? Yes, Elara said, her voice barely above a whisper. They have been the ones pulling the strings. They created the royal bloodline to ensure that the kingdom's magic would remain in balance. But over time, the balance has been lost. The gods' influence waned, and Malachar was the result of that disruption. Ethan's mind was spinning. Gods, magic. The very foundation of the kingdom was tied to something far older and more powerful than anything he could have imagined. And Elara, the princess he had risked his life to save, was at the center of it all. But how does this all relate to you? Ethan asked, his voice trembling with a mix of confusion and fear. What do you mean, you were born to bring balance? Elara looked him in the eyes, her expression grave. Because I am the last of the original royal bloodline, she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. The bloodline that was meant to be the keeper of the gods' power. The one who would restore the balance, or destroy everything. Ethan took a step back, his mind struggling to catch up with the revelation. You're saying that you were meant to either save Thaloria or destroy it. Yes, Elara said softly. The curse, the dark magic, it was all part of the test. I had to prove that I could control the power of the gods, that I could restore the balance they once created. But I failed. I allowed Malachar to rise, and now the kingdom is on the brink of collapse. But you defeated him, Eric said, his voice filled with urgency. You broke the curse. You're free. You can still do this. Elara shook her head slowly. It's too late. The power of the gods has already begun to take hold again. Malachar was only a small part of the puzzle. The real enemy lies within the kingdom itself, within the magic that controls us all. Ethan felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. What are you saying? Are you telling us we're too late? Elara's face was filled with sorrow. Not too late, but nearly. The gods are awakening, and their power is beyond anything we can comprehend. They will either accept me as their vessel, or they will destroy everything. Thaloria's fate lies in my hands. Ethan's mind reeled. He had thought that freeing Elara would be the end of it, that the battle against Malachar would be the final test. But now, everything had changed. There was something far more powerful at work, something that even the princess herself couldn't control. Eric stepped forward, determination in his eyes. Then we fight. We fight to the end. Elara looked at him, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. We may have to fight, Eric, but the real battle is within me. I must decide whether I am strong enough to bear the weight of the gods' power. Ethan could only watch in silence as Elara's words settled in. The real war had just begun, and it was not just against Malachar. It was a battle for the very soul of Thaloria, one that would test everything Elara had, everything they all had. And the twist. The true enemy wasn't someone they could fight with swords or magic. The enemy was a force much older, much more terrifying, and it was inside Elara herself.